March 12, 1945. A German woman stood frozen in a wooden bathhouse somewhere in rural Georgia. Hot water cascaded over her shoulders for the first time in 6 months. Steam rose around her like ghosts. The scent of lemon soap filled her lungs. Her hands shook as they touched skin she barely recognized anymore. Margaret Weber had expected cruelty. She had expected punishment. She had expected everything her German officers had warned her about when the Americans captured her unit in France. But instead, she got privacy. She got warm water that never seemed to run out. She got a bar of white soap wrapped in paper stamped with the U.S. Army logo. And she got something that terrified her more than any weapon she had faced during the war. She got kindness from the enemy. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of the soap. Such a simple thing. Such an impossible thing. The water ran down her back, washing away layers of dirt that had become part of her. 6 months of grime. 6 months of shame. 6 months of survival that had left her feeling less than human. And now this impossible warmth, this unbearable gentleness. Through the wooden wall of her private stall, she could hear another woman crying. Not screams of pain, quiet sobs of confusion. Margaret understood. The kindness was harder to bear than cruelty would have been. Cruelty made sense. Cruelty fit the world they had been taught to expect. But this careful mercy, this planned compassion, this was something that did not fit into any story they had been told about America. Margaret closed her eyes and let the hot water sink into her bones. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought kept circling like a vulture. This is a trick. It has to be a trick. They want us vulnerable. They want us grateful. They want us weak, but the water kept running, the soap kept smelling of lemons, and her body kept responding to the warmth like a flower turning toward the sun. The sound reached her first, water hitting the wooden floor in a steady rhythm, almost musical in its consistency. Then the hiss of steam rising from the pipes, a whisper of heat that filled the small stall. In the distance, she could hear other women, some silent, some weeping, some breathing in short, shallow gasps, as if they too could not believe what was happening to them. The smell of the soap was wrong. It was too clean, too civilian, too much like the world before the war when such luxuries had been normal, expected, unremarkable. Now the scent of lemons felt like a violation of everything the past 6 months had taught her about survival and suffering. She touched her own hair. Matted and filthy, it had become almost solid, a helmet of dirt and grease and despair. But now under the water it was beginning to soften, beginning to remember what it had been, beginning to become hair again instead of just another piece of armor against the world. Her skin felt strange under her fingertips. She had stopped looking at her body weeks ago. It had become just a tool, a machine that needed to keep functioning. But now the water was forcing her to feel again, to notice, to remember that this body had once belonged to a woman who took baths on Sunday evenings, a woman who had a husband, a home, a life. Friedrich. His name hit at her like a fist. She had been so careful not to think about him. Thinking about him meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling. Feeling meant breaking. And she could not afford to break. Not in the camps, not on the trains, not during the 6 months of transport across an ocean to a country she had been taught to hate. But the water would not let her hide. The warmth kept pulling at her defenses. The soap kept reminding her of civilization, of humanity, of all the things she had lost. Through the wooden wall, a voice, young, trembling, speaking in German. Maggie. Is the water well really hot? Margaret's throat closed. The question was so simple, so impossible to answer. Because yes, the water was hot. And that single fact was dismantling everything she thought she understood about the world. Yes, she managed, just that one word. But it carried everything: confusion, terror, impossible hope, the acknowledgement that something was happening here that made no sense, that contradicted every warning, every piece of propaganda, every reason she had to hate these people. What would happen when she walked out of this bathhouse? The answer would change 847 women's understanding of everything they had been taught about America. But Margaret did not know that yet. All she knew was that her hands were shaking and her heart was breaking and nothing made sense anymore. 6 months earlier, everything had made perfect sense. September 1944. France. The afternoon her world ended. Margaret remembered the German officer's face as he gathered the women together for what they all knew would be their last briefing. His uniform was dirty. His eyes were hollow. He had stopped believing in victory weeks ago, but he still believed in the propaganda. If the Americans capture you, he had said, his voice carrying across the coal barn where they huddled, death would be a mercy compared to what they will do. The women had listened in silence. They had heard the stories. They had been told about American savagery, about how the enemy treated prisoners, about humiliation and starvation and worse, much worse. The officer had made sure they understood. The Americans were animals. The Americans were monsters. The Americans would make them wish they had died in the fighting. Margaret had believed him. Why would she not? She had lost her husband, Friedrich, at Normandy just 3 months before, killed by American guns on that bloody beach, left to rot in France while the Americans celebrated their victory. She had every reason to hate them, every reason to fear them, every reason to expect the worst. The capture itself had been almost gentle. That should have been her first clue that everything she had been told was a lie. The American soldiers had found them hiding in a farmhouse. 23 women, exhausted and terrified, waiting for the end. The Americans had called out in broken German for them to come out with their hands up. Margaret had expected shots. She had expected violence. She had expected the stories to be true. Instead, a young American sergeant had looked at them with tired eyes and said something in English to his men. Then he had gestured for the women to sit down. Sit down, not kneel, not lie face down in the mud, just sit. And then the Americans had given them water, real water from American canteens. The first kindness, the first crack in the wall of everything Margaret thought she knew. But the train journey had tested that crack. 847 women from different units all gathered together like cattle for the long trip to wherever the Americans were taking them. 6 months on trains and ships and more trains. 6 months of cold and fear and uncertainty. 6 months without privacy or proper food or any chance to wash properly. The conditions had been harsh enough that Margaret's old beliefs had started to rebuild themselves. See, she had thought, this is the truth. The water was just a trick. This is how they really treat us. And then they had arrived at Camp Pine Valley, Georgia. The train doors had opened onto a warm morning. Pine trees, clean air, guards who stood calm and organized instead of shouting and shoving. Margaret had stepped down onto American soil, expecting the nightmare to finally begin in earnest. Instead, she had smelled soap on the wind, fresh soap, real soap, the kind of scent that belonged to another world. A world before the war, a world where human beings still mattered. Take your time, ladies, one of the guards had said in careful, slow English. His rifle was pointed at the ground. His face showed no hatred, no disgust, just professional distance, and something that might have been pity. Margaret had wanted to spit at him. Take your time, as if they were guests arriving at a hotel instead of prisoners arriving at a camp, as if the Americans thought polite words could make up for everything. But her mouth was too dry for spitting. Her body was too tired for rage. So she had shuffled forward with the others, waiting to see what fresh hell the Americans had prepared for them. The camp had looked too clean. That was the first wrong thing. The roads were swept. The guard towers were painted. The wooden barracks stood in neat rows with windows that actually had glass in them. And near the entrance, impossible and terrifying in its implications, stood a row of new wooden buildings with metal roofs gleaming in the sun. Steam drifted from small chimneys. The sound of running water echoed across the yard. Buckets of fresh water stood at every corner. One of the younger women had whispered, "This looks like a village, not a prison." Margaret had grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Don't be fooled," she had hissed. "This is how they break you. They make you hope. Then they take it away." But the hope had already started growing. Margaret could feel it like a cancer in her chest, because the bathhouses were real. The Americans had built them on purpose. Someone had planned this. Someone had decided that 847 German women deserved hot water and privacy and soap that smelled like lemons. Someone had made a choice to be kind, and that choice was more dangerous than any weapon. Now Margaret stood in one of those bathhouses, water running over her skin, trying to hold on to her hatred like a shield. But the warmth kept seeping in. The soap kept washing away more than dirt. And in the next stall, she could hear Anna Schmidt's voice, young and broken and desperately confused. Maggie Anna whispered through the wooden wall, "Is the water really hot?" Margaret's throat closed. Yes, she wanted to say. Yes, and I do not understand why. Yes, and it is breaking something inside me. Yes, and I am terrified of what it means. Yes, she managed, just that one word. But it carried everything. What you are about to hear is the true story of 847 German women who discovered that America's greatest weapon was not bombs or bullets. It was not superior numbers or better training or more advanced technology. It was something far more powerful, something their own country had forgotten in its rush toward conquest and glory. Something so simple and so profound that it would change the course of these women's lives forever. It was the willingness to follow the rules even when rage would have been easier, the strength to see enemies as human beings, the courage to choose protocol over revenge. These American soldiers and guards and administrators could have done anything to their German prisoners. The women had bombed American cities. They had supported a regime that murdered millions. They had contributed to a war that killed American sons and brothers and fathers. No one would have blamed the Americans for showing cruelty in return, but instead they built bathhouses. They provided hot water. They followed the Geneva Convention to the letter, not because they had to, not because anyone was watching, but because that was the protocol. And the protocol mattered more than their personal feelings. That choice, that simple decision to do what was right instead of what was easy, became the most powerful weapon America ever deployed. If you value true stories from the greatest generation, stories that show what America really stood for in its finest hour, please take a moment to subscribe and support this channel. These stories are disappearing. The men and women who lived them are leaving us. But their lessons remain as vital today as they were in 1945. And if you or your family encountered German prisoners of war during this time, if you have stories to share about how America treated its enemies, please leave them in the comments below. We want to hear from you. These memories matter. This history matters. The truth matters. But before we understand why the Americans chose mercy over vengeance, we need to understand the journey that brought 847 German women across an ocean to a camp in Georgia they did not even know existed. Let me tell you about the three women whose lives intersected in that Georgia bathhouse on a warm March morning. Anna Schmidt was 24 years old. She had been a communications assistant for a German military unit, typing messages and organizing files and trying to stay invisible as the war collapsed around her. She was small and quiet and carried a sadness in her eyes that made her look older than her years. In the pocket of her filthy coat, she kept one photograph. It was crumpled and fading, but she guarded it like a treasure. Her son David, 3 years old, left behind in Berlin with Anna's mother when the unit had been ordered to France. The last time Anna had seen David, he had cried and clung to her neck and asked when she would come back. She had promised him it would be soon. She had lied to her baby boy and then watched him wave goodbye from her mother's arms. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of not knowing if he was alive or dead. 8 months of not knowing if Berlin still stood or had been reduced to rubble. 8 months of carrying that photograph and praying to a God she was not sure existed anymore. Anna had never wanted to be part of the war. She had just wanted to raise her son and live a quiet life. But the war had taken her husband, first killed in Russia before David was even born. Then it had taken her choices. Then it had taken her freedom. And now it had taken her across an ocean to a country she had been taught to hate, where she stood in a private shower stall, crying because the water was hot and the soap smelled like lemons, and she could not remember the last time anyone had treated her like a human being. Margaret Weber was 28 years old and hard as iron. She had been a nurse before the war, skilled and efficient, and good at separating her emotions from her work. When her husband Friedrich had joined the army, she had joined too. Someone had to patch up the wounded. Someone had to close the eyes of the dying. Someone had to keep moving forward even when everything was falling apart. Margaret had been good at moving forward. She had been good at not feeling too much. She had been good at surviving. Friedrich's death at Normandy should have broken her. The news had arrived while she was stitching up a soldier who would not stop screaming. "Your husband is dead, killed by American guns on a beach in France. No body to bury, no grave to visit, just gone. Erased. One more casualty in a war that had already consumed millions." Margaret had finished stitching up the screaming soldier. Then she had gone outside and vomited until there was nothing left inside her. Then she had gone back to work. The hatred had kept her alive. The hatred had given her purpose. She had hated the Americans for taking Friedrich. She had hated the war for taking everything else. She had hated the world for continuing to spin when it should have stopped. And now she stood in an American bathhouse with hot water running over her skin. And all that hatred was drowning in confusion. Because the Americans were not supposed to be kind. They were not supposed to care. They were not supposed to follow rules that treated enemy prisoners with dignity and respect. They were supposed to be monsters. And monsters were so much easier to hate than human beings doing their jobs with quiet competence. Helen Fisher was 34 years old and the closest thing the women had to a leader. She had been a teacher before the war, patient and thoughtful and good at helping people understand complicated things. She had two daughters, 14 and 16, left behind in the British zone of Germany with Helen's sister. The girls were alive. Helen had received one letter confirming that much before the mail had stopped. But she had not heard from them in 3 months. 3 months of not knowing if they were safe. 3 months of not knowing if they still had a home. 3 months of trying to stay strong for the younger women who looked to her for guidance. Helen did not hate the Americans. She was too tired for hatred, too aware of how the war had been built on lies to believe any more propaganda. She watched. She observed. She documented everything in her mind, keeping careful mental notes of how the Americans behaved. She had already noticed that the guards never leered at the women, that the medical staff treated them with professional courtesy, that the food rations seemed to be the same as what the American soldiers ate. These details mattered. These details told a story that contradicted everything Berlin had said about America. When Helen stepped out of her shower stall clean for the first time in 6 months, she saw the future more clearly than either Margaret or Anna could. This was not a trick. This was not manipulation. This was simply what happened when a country decided to follow its own rules. The Geneva Convention existed on paper. America was choosing to make it real. That choice had power. That choice would change them all. The three women stood together in the bathhouse dressing area, wrapped in clean towels, their hair wet, their skin soft, their minds reeling from the simple miracle of hot water and privacy. Around them, 844 other women were having the same experience, the same confusion, the same terrifying hope, the same question that none of them could answer. Why would the enemy give them this? The mess hall doors stood open. The smell of fried eggs and bacon drifted through the air like a promise, like a threat, like everything they thought they knew about America being turned upside down and shaken until all the lies fell out. The mess hall was a long, wooden building with wide windows that let in the morning light. Inside, metal trays were stacked neatly on a counter. Soldiers in white aprons moved quickly behind the serving line. The room buzzed with quiet sounds, pans clattering, coffee being poured, boots stepping lightly on the wooden floor. It did not feel like a place meant to punish anyone. It felt like a place meant to feed people. Just people. Not enemies, not prisoners, just hungry human beings who needed a meal. When the first German women entered, they froze. On the counter sat large metal trays of scrambled eggs, still steaming, piles of crisp bacon strips perfectly cooked, bowls of oatmeal with brown sugar on the side, baskets of oranges bright and impossibly colorful, fresh loaves of bread that had been baked that morning. One woman whispered, "This is for soldiers, not us." But the American cook simply smiled and gestured them forward. "Step right up, ma'am," he said in English that none of them fully understood. But his tone was clear. His meaning was obvious. This food was for them. All of it. The cook was a black man in his 40s with kind eyes and steady hands. Sergeant Thomas Wright, though they would not learn his name until later. He wore a clean white apron, and he served each woman with the same careful attention he would have given to American officers. He did not rush them. He did not make them feel ashamed. He just filled their plates and nodded and said, "Next, please," in his soft Georgia accent. Anna stood in line behind Margaret, her hands shaking as she held her empty tray. She had never seen a black person before. German propaganda had taught her specific lies about black Americans, lies about savagery and violence and primitive behavior. But Sergeant Wright was gentle. He was professional. He looked at her with simple human kindness and asked in slow, careful English, "Eggs, ma'am, We got bacon too, and biscuits fresh from the oven. Everything Anna had been taught shattered in that moment. Every lie became visible. Every piece of propaganda revealed itself as the poison it had always been. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He filled her plate with more food than she had seen in months. Scrambled eggs that were soft and fluffy, 3 strips of bacon that smelled like heaven, 2 biscuits that were still warm. And when he handed her the plate, he smiled at her like she was a person instead of an enemy. Ma'am, that single word kept echoing in Anna's mind as she carried her tray to one of the long wooden tables. Ma'am, like she was a person, like she mattered, like the color of her uniform and the language she spoke and the country she came from were less important than the simple fact that she was a human being who needed breakfast. Margaret sat across from Anna. Her plate was full, her stomach was empty, her mind was at war with itself. She had barely touched her food, analyzing instead of eating, watching the American guards who stood at their posts without hovering, observing the cooks who moved behind the serving line with practiced efficiency, noting that the soldiers ate the same food from the same kitchen. Anna took her first bite of scrambled eggs. The taste exploded across her tongue. Salt and butter and something she could not name. Something that tasted like comfort, like safety, like mornings before the war when David would wake up asking for breakfast and Anna would make eggs the way her mother had taught her. The bacon was crispy and salty and rich with fat. After 6 months of near starvation, the taste was almost overwhelming. Beside her, a young woman named Rosa ate half a strip of bacon and then vomited into a handkerchief. Too much richness, too much flavor, too much too soon for a body that had forgotten what real food felt like. An American medic appeared at Rosa's side almost immediately. "Easy now," he said in English, his tone gentle. He helped her stand, guided her outside for fresh air, came back 5 minutes later with plain bread and water. "Start with this," he explained through gestures. "Small bites. Let your stomach remember." Margaret finally took a bite of her bacon. The flavor hit her like a physical blow, smoky and savory and perfect. It tasted almost exactly like the bacon Friedrich used to bring home from the butcher shop in their town. The bacon they used to eat on Sunday mornings when there was time to cook a proper breakfast and sit together at the small table in their kitchen and talk about nothing important. Before the war, before the uniforms, before everything. The tears came silent and hot. She chewed mechanically, trying to make her throat work so she could swallow without breaking down completely. But something inside was cracking. The bacon had found the fault line. The eggs were widening it. The simple decency of being called ma'am by a man she had been taught to despise had split it wide open. She stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. Several women looked up startled. Anna reached for her arm, but Margaret pulled away. She walked to the center of the mess hall where Captain James Reynolds stood with his clipboard. She stopped 2 feet in front of him and spoke in the German she knew he could not understand. "This is wrong," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. "We are prisoners, not guests." The mess hall fell silent. All eyes turned to watch. Reynolds looked at her calmly, waiting. She switched to broken English, forcing out words she had learned during the war. This wrong. We prisoners. Not guests, not friends." Reynolds' expression did not change. He gestured to a translator, a young American corporal who spoke fluent German. "Please tell her what I am about to say," Reynolds instructed in English. The translator nodded and turned to Margaret as Reynolds spoke. "You are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention," he said, his voice level and professional. "This is not kindness. This is protocol. This is the law. This is how America treats all prisoners in our custody. Not revenge. Law." Margaret's hands clenched into fists. "Protocol," she spat. "We bombed your cities. We killed your soldiers. We fought you for years." The translator conveyed her words. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am, you did," he replied. "And you will be treated according to international law regardless. Not revenge. Law." Why? Margaret's voice cracked on the word. Why follow rules for people who showed you none? This was the question, the real question, the one that had been building in her chest since the first moment of hot water touched her skin. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke slowly, making sure the translator got every word. "Because that is what separates us from what you fought for, ma'am. We follow the rules even when it is hard. especially when it is hard. That is what makes us America. The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Every German woman was listening now. Every American soldier had stopped working to watch. This moment mattered more than any battle. This was about what countries chose to be when they had all the power. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. Not her hatred, not yet, but something close to it. Some certainty she had been holding on to like a lifeline. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her legs no longer able to support her weight. "Give her water," Reynolds said quietly, "and let her sit as long as she needs to." He made a note on his clipboard and walked away. The protocol had been explained. The rules had been stated clearly. What the prisoners did with that information was up to them. The women were assigned to their barracks after breakfast. Long wooden buildings with rows of metal frame bunks, each with a real mattress and 2 blankets and a small pillow. The building smelled of fresh paint and new wood. Sunlight filtered through windows that opened to let in the warm Georgia air. Anna chose a bunk near a window where she could see pine trees swaying in the breeze. She sat on the edge of the mattress, testing its firmness. Actual padding, actual support. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the photograph of David. 3 years old, blonde hair, bright eyes, smiling at something outside the frame. She tucked the photo under her pillow, hiding it from view, but keeping it close. Then she lay on her side and stared out the window at the Georgia pines and tried not to think about how far away Berlin was. How many miles of ocean separated her from her son? The first week at Camp Pine Valley passed in a blur of new routines. The women were given work assignments based on their skills and experience. Anna, with her steady hands and organized mind, was assigned to the medical supply room. Margaret, with her nursing background, was assigned to the kitchen despite her protests. Helen became a library assistant. They were also given something unprecedented. They would be paid for their work, not in American dollars but in camp scrip, small paper coupons that could be used at the canteen. When Anna received her first week's pay, she stared at the coupons in her hand like they were artifacts from another planet. "They are paying us," she asked Helen in disbelief. "They are giving us dignity," Helen replied. "Work deserves payment. That is a principle worth respecting." Anna bought writing paper. 3 sheets. 3 chances to tell David she was alive and thinking of him and counting the days until she could hold him again. She took her purchase back to the barracks and sat on her bunk with the paper in her lap, trying to decide what to write. "Dear David," she began in her careful handwriting, "I am in a place called America. It is very far from home, but I am safe. I think about you every day. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Your Mama." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it under her pillow with the photograph. She had no envelope, no way to send it, no address to write even if she could send it. But she had written it, and somehow that made David feel a little bit closer. In the kitchen, Margaret worked in silence. The abundance was staggering. Sacks of flour, bins of sugar, crates of fresh vegetables delivered daily, meat in quantities she had not seen since before the war. The Americans were not hoarding the good food for themselves. They were cooking from the same supplies for everyone. It bothered her more than mistreatment would have. This careful equality, this insistence on treating everyone fairly, this was harder to process. She tested them. Week 2, she deliberately took an extra potato when no one was watching, slipped it into her pocket, waited for the punishment. Days passed. Nothing happened. Week 3, she took 2 potatoes. Still nothing. The not knowing drove her crazy. Week 4, she took a potato in front of Sergeant Wright, waited for his reaction. He saw her, said nothing, just nodded and continued working. Margaret could not stand it anymore. She stopped him. In broken English, she asked, "You see me take potato, why? You say nothing." Wright smiled gently. "Ma'am, you want extra potato? Just ask. We got plenty, you not punish for being hungry." "No, ma'am, that ain't right." Margaret's carefully constructed anger crumbled a little more. She did not understand this country. She did not understand these people. She did not understand how kindness could be so consistent, so relentless, so completely at odds with everything she had been taught. But the water kept running, the food kept coming, the protocol kept holding, and slowly and possibly, something inside Margaret Weber began to change. Week 3 brought a development that would challenge Margaret more than any American soldier ever could. The announcement came during morning roll call. "We will have visitors today," the translator conveyed Captain Reynolds' words. "American civilian volunteers from a local church. They will be here from 1,000 hours until 1,500 hours. They are bringing books, sewing supplies, and other donated items. Your cooperation is appreciated, but not required." Not required. The Americans kept giving them choices, kept treating them like human beings capable of making decisions. It was disorienting, maddening, almost cruel in its kindness. But before the volunteers arrived, something else happened, something that would shake the foundation of everything Margaret thought she understood about American intentions. It was a Tuesday morning. Margaret had gone to the supply closet adjacent to the main bathhouse, searching for additional towels. The women in her barracks had requested more, and she had volunteered to find them. It was easier than sitting still, easier than thinking. The closet was larger than she expected. Shelves lined the walls stocked with cleaning supplies, spare towels, bars of that lemon-scented soap that haunted her dreams. She moved deeper into the space looking for the towels when her foot caught on something. A notebook, partially hidden behind a stack of cleaning buckets. Brown leather cover, official looking. She picked it up without thinking, opened it. Inside were construction blueprints, detailed plans for the bathhouse facility, measurements, materials lists, budget allocations, everything laid out with military precision. She could not read all the English, but the drawings were clear, the specifications obvious. This was a plan for building the bathhouses, for creating the private stalls with hot water that had undone her so completely. And at the top of the first page, a date that made her hands start shaking. January 15th, 1945. Margaret stared at those numbers until they blurred. January 15th, 2 months. 2 full months before 847 German women stepped off that train in Georgia. 2 months before any American at this camp knew their names or their faces or their stories. This was not improvised. This was not a fortunate coincidence. This was not even a reaction to their arrival. This was planned, budgeted, constructed with care and precision. Someone in the American military had looked at regulations and decided that female prisoners of war deserved private bathing facilities with hot water. And then they had made it happen, before they even knew who would use them, before they could see gratitude or fear or confusion in the eyes of the women who would stand under that water. They had chosen to be kind, not in response to anything, not to gain anything, just because their rules said it was right. Margaret's vision swam, her chest felt tight. This piece of paper, this documented proof of intentional mercy, was more devastating than any cruelty could have been. Because cruelty, she understood. Cruelty made sense in a world at war. Cruelty fit the narrative she had been fed about enemies and monsters and the righteousness of hatred. But this careful planning, this bureaucratic compassion, this was something else entirely. Anna found her there 10 minutes later, still holding the notebook, tears streaming down her face. "What is it?" Anna whispered, fear in her voice. "What did you find?" Margaret could not speak. She just turned the notebook so Anna could see the date. January 15th. Anna looked at the blueprints, looked at the date. Understanding dawned slowly then all at once. Her own eyes filled with tears. "They knew we were coming." Margaret managed her voice hollow. "They built this for us before we even arrived. They chose to be kind." Helen appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of crying. She took the notebook from Margaret's shaking hands. "Read it carefully." Her teacher's mind processing the information with characteristic thoroughness. "This is not emotional," Helen said quietly. "This is procedural. They follow their own rules even when no one is watching. That is more frightening than cruelty, because it means they truly believe it." The 3 women stood in that supply closet surrounded by soap and towels and the physical evidence that America's kindness was not performance or manipulation. It was policy. It was protocol. It was what they did when they thought no one would ever know. And that changed everything. At precisely 10 o'clock that morning, the bus pulled up outside the main gate. 12 American women stepped out, ranging in age from mid-20s to early 60s. They wore simple dresses and sturdy shoes. They carried boxes and bags filled with donated items. And they smiled, actually smiled, like they were happy to be there. One woman in particular caught Margaret's attention. She looked about 45 with graying hair, pulled back in a practical bun, in a face that suggested both strength and kindness. She wore a simple blue dress, and she organized the other volunteers with quiet efficiency that reminded Margaret of good nurses. Women who knew how to get things done without making a fuss about it. The volunteers set up tables in the recreation area. Books, sewing supplies, writing materials, board games, magazines, personal care items, all donated, all brought here by American civilians who had chosen to spend their day helping enemy prisoners. Anna was one of the first German women to approach the tables. She hovered near the book display, her fingers tracing the spines of novels she could not read. She had not touched a book for pleasure in over a year. The simple act of choosing something to read felt almost decadent. The woman in the blue dress noticed her, walked over with a warm smile that reached her eyes. "Hello there," she said in English, her southern accent soft and welcoming. "Are you looking for something to read?" She picked up a book with a peaceful countryside scene on the cover. "Would you like this one, dear? It's a gentle story about family and home." Anna took the book carefully as if it might dissolve in her hands. "Thank you," she managed in halting English. "You are kind." The woman's smile widened. "My name is Catherine Harrison, but everyone calls me Kate. I'm from a ranch outside Fort Worth. That's in Texas." "Do you like to read?" "Yes," Anna said. "Before war." And then, because something in this woman's face made her feel safe, because the kindness in her eyes looked real and deep and touched by its own sorrow, Anna heard herself saying, "I have son, 3 years, in Berlin. I do not know if he lives." Kate Harrison's face transformed. The smile faded into something more profound. Compassion, understanding, the look of someone who knew exactly what it felt like to lose a child to war's chaos. "Oh, honey," Kate said, and her voice broke slightly. "I'm so sorry. That must be so hard." She reached out and squeezed Anna's hand, just briefly, just a moment of contact. But it carried more comfort than all the protocol and procedures and hot water combined. This was not military policy. This was not Geneva Convention compliance. This was human connection. Person to person, mother to mother. Anna felt something crack open in her chest. This woman understood. Somehow this stranger from Texas understood what it meant to not know. To lie awake at night wondering if your child was alive or dead or scared or hungry. To feel your heart being torn in two by miles and borders and war. Kate released her hand and gestured toward the sewing circle forming near the windows. "Would you like to join us? We're just starting. It's nice to have something to do with your hands while you talk." Anna nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed Kate to the circle of chairs where other volunteers and a few brave German women were gathering. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear or despair. She felt hope, small and fragile and terrifying in its vulnerability, but hope nonetheless. Across the recreation area, Margaret watched with narrowed eyes, looking for the angle, searching for the manipulation. These American women did not have to be here. They chose to be here. They chose to spend their day helping enemy prisoners. Women whose country had bombed London and murdered millions and started a war that killed their sons and husbands and brothers. Why, one of the younger volunteers approached Margaret. "Would you like to join us? We're starting a sewing circle." "I do not sew," Margaret lied. Kate Harrison looked over from where she sat with Anna. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment Margaret saw something in Kate's face that she recognized. Grief. Deep and carefully managed grief. The kind that came from losing someone you loved more than life itself. Kate stood and walked over to Margaret. "I notice you haven't joined us yet," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We could use your hands. You look like someone who knows how to work." It was a challenge, gentle but unmistakable. And Margaret Weber had never backed down from a challenge in her life. She walked over slowly, sat down at the edge of the circle, took the needle and thread that Kate handed her without a word. Iso. They worked in silence for several minutes. The rhythm of sewing was familiar, comforting. Margaret's hands remembered what to do even as her mind stayed guarded and wary. Then Kate spoke quietly. "My son died 8 months ago at Saipan. He was 20 years old." Margaret's hands stilled on her sewing. She understood enough English. Son died, 8 months. She looked at Kate and saw the same exhaustion she carried, the same hollow place where joy used to live. "My husband," Margaret said in halting English. "Normandy. Americans kill him." Kate nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, standard, the kind of thing people said because they had to say something. But coming from this woman whose son had died fighting Japanese forces while Germans fought Americans on another front, they carried unexpected weight. This was not empty politeness. This was one broken heart recognizing another. Why you here? Margaret asked, her voice rough. Why you help enemy? Kate was quiet for a moment, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with practiced ease. Then she said, because my son would not want me to hate. He believed in America, in what we stand for, in treating people with dignity even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. And I want to honor his memory by being the person he believed I could be. The translator standing nearby conveyed the words carefully. Margaret heard them, understood them, and hated them, because they were exactly what Captain Reynolds had said. But Kate Harrison was not speaking from theory or policy or military protocol. She was speaking from the same place of grief that Margaret inhabited, from the same desperate need to make meaning from meaningless death. I do not know how, Margaret said quietly. I do not know how to stop hating. Kate reached over and covered Margaret's hand with her own. You don't have to stop all at once. You just have to let yourself feel something else first. Anything else. Even for a moment. Margaret looked down at the sewing in her lap. Small stitches, careful work. She picked up the needle and began to sew. And for just a moment, she felt something other than hatred. The simple satisfaction of creating instead of destroying, of making something whole instead of tearing it apart. It was not forgiveness. It was not peace. But it was a beginning. That afternoon, and after the volunteers had left, something happened that would change everything for Anna Schmidt. Mail call. Names were called out one by one. Women stepped forward with shaking hands to receive envelopes that had traveled across an ocean. Fisher Helen. Helen stepped forward and took an envelope from the British zone. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her daughters were alive. The apartment was damaged but still standing. Food was scarce, but they were surviving. Tears ran down her face as she read her daughter's handwriting telling her they loved her and missed her and were waiting for her to come home. Schmidt Anna. Anna's heart stopped. Then started again, too fast, too hard. She stepped forward like a sleepwalker. Took the envelope. Saw her mother's handwriting shaky but legible. The postmark said February, 1 month ago. She found a place to sit on the barracks steps away from the other women. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely open the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Her mother's writing. Brief but clear. David was alive, asking for Anna constantly, sleeping with the scarf she had left behind. The apartment was damaged but still standing. Food was scarce, but they were surviving. Her mother's health was declining, and at the end, the line that broke Anna's heart and mended it in the same breath. He remembers you, Anna. He talks about you every day. He asks when Mama's coming home. Come home, my daughter. Come home while I still have the strength to help you. Anna folded the letter carefully, put it in her pocket next to the photograph. Then she put her head in her hands and cried. David remembered her. David was alive and he remembered her. But how could she go home? Germany was collapsing. She was an ocean away, trapped in a camp in Georgia while her son asked for his mama, and her mother grew weaker every day. Helen found her there an hour later, still crying. She sat down beside Anna and put an arm around her shoulders. Good news or bad? She asked gently. Both, Anna managed. David is alive. My mother is dying. And I am here, useless. The war cannot last much longer, Helen said. When it ends, they will send us home. The Americans follow their rules. Anna wanted to believe her, but hope felt like a luxury she could not afford. Still, she made a decision that evening. She would write to David using her precious writing paper. Even if the letter never reached him, putting words on paper made him feel closer. She sat on her bunk that night and wrote by the light of the single bulb. Dear David, I am in a place far away called America, but I am coming home to you, I promise. Wait for me, my darling boy. Mama loves you more than all the stars. She folded the letter and tucked it under her pillow with the photograph in the letter from her mother. 3 pieces of paper, 3 connections to the life she had lost, 3 reasons to survive. But what Anna did not know, could not know, was that another letter was already making its way across the ocean. A letter that would arrive in exactly 10 days. A letter that would shatter everything she thought she understood about David's safety and her own future. Week 5 brought the second letter. Anna recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, but something was wrong. The envelope was heavier, the writing shakier. She opened it with hands that already knew this would hurt. Anna. The letter began. There is something I must tell you, something I should have told you in the first letter, but I did not have the courage. Anna's vision blurred. She forced herself to keep reading. After the bombing in January, David was found wandering the streets alone. I had been injured, taken to hospital. He was frightened and lost. American soldiers found him. They took him to an orphanage run by American military. I tried to explain I was his grandmother, but I had no papers, no proof. Everything was destroyed in the bombing. An American military family adopted him, Anna. Legally, on January 15th, the same date on the blueprints, the same day the Americans had decided to build bathhouses for prisoners they had not yet met, the same day they had chosen to save a lost German boy, a captain and his wife. They are taking him to America, to Texas. He is safe, he is fed, he is warm, but he is no longer ours. I could not stop it. I am so sorry, my daughter. The letter fell from Anna's fingers. The words echoed in her mind, each one a small death. David adopted, American family, Texas. David was in America. David was in Texas. David was no longer legally her son. She stood up stumbling. She needed Captain Reynolds. She needed help. She needed someone to fix this, to undo this, to give her back her son. She ran across the camp to the administration building, burst into Reynolds' office without knocking. Please, she said, her English deserting her in her panic. She thrust the letter at him. My son, Americans take my son, you must help. Reynolds read the letter carefully. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. This was complicated. This was going to hurt. I will check the records, he said. But Mrs. Schmidt, you need to understand. If the adoption was legal, there may be nothing we can do. He is my son. Anna cried. I understand, Reynolds said quietly. I will investigate. Give me a few days. 3 days later, Captain Reynolds called Anna to his office again. He had documents spread across his desk, official adoption papers, military records, orphanage certifications. The paper trail of how a lost German boy became an American child. Captain William Harrison and his wife Catherine Harrison adopted a boy named David Schmidt on January 15, 1945. Reynolds explained through the translator. The orphanage in Berlin certified that the child had no living relatives. Your mother's injury made her unable to care for him. Legal adoption under Allied military authority. According to these records, the boy is healthy and adjusting well to his new home. Anna heard the words through a fog of pain, but one word cut through. Harrison. Catherine Harrison. Where is he, she whispered. Fort Worth, Texas. The Harrison Ranch outside the city. Harrison. Kate Harrison. The woman from the sewing circle. The woman who had been kind to her. The woman who had squeezed her hand and understood what it meant to miss a child. That woman had Anna's son. That woman was raising David. That woman had become his mother while Anna was trapped on the other side of an ocean. The world tilted. Anna grabbed the edge of Reynolds' desk to keep from falling. Kate's face floated in her memory. Kind smile. Warm hands. My son died 8 months ago at Saipan. She had lost a son, so she saved Anna's. She filled the hole in her heart with a German boy who needed a mother, and Anna did not know whether to scream or say thank you. I want him back, she said. Reynolds looked at her with something close to compassion. I cannot do that, Mrs. Schmidt. The adoption is legal, but there may be another way. He pulled out different forms. Work visa applications, sponsor requirements. If someone in America sponsors you for a work visa, you could stay here after the war ends. You could be near your son. You could be part of his life. It would not be the same as having him back, but it would be something. He paused, watching her face. Mrs. Harrison, Kate Harrison. She might be willing to sponsor you. I could arrange a meeting. Anna stared at the forms. Stay in America. Live in the country that had adopted her son. Be near David but never truly have him. Work for the woman who had replaced her. Live with the knowledge that another woman tucked him in at night and heard his prayers and received his hugs. But she would see him. She could watch him grow. She could be part of his life, even if she could never be his only mother. What else could she do? Arrange it, she whispered. On May 8th, 1945, the world changed. The announcement came during morning roll call. Captain Reynolds stood before the assembled women with an expression that was almost sad. The translator conveyed his words in a voice that shook slightly. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. The American soldiers erupted in cheers. Celebrations echoed across the camp. Victory, survival, going home. But the German women sat in shocked silence. This was not victory. This was the death of everything they had known. The final confirmation that they had lost not just the war, but their country, their homes, their futures. Margaret stared at the ground. "It's over," she whispered. "We lost everything." Helen reached for her hand. "No, the war is over. Now we find what's left." Anna clutched David's photograph, the one from the first letter, before she knew he had been adopted. "Now I can try to see him," she said, "even if he is not mine anymore." Reynolds continued speaking. "The repatriation process will begin soon. You will be returned to Germany as transportation becomes available. This may take months. In the meantime, camp procedures remain unchanged. But something else had been announced quietly through administrative channels. German prisoners of war with American sponsors could apply for work visas. They could remain in America after the war ended, help with post-war reconstruction, eventually earn citizenship. The requirements were clear. Demonstrate loyalty to American values. Denounce Nazi ideology publicly. Have a legitimate sponsor. Pass background checks. Margaret applied immediately. "I have nothing in Germany," she told Helen. "Friedrich is dead. My home is destroyed. Here I have possibility." Mrs. Charlotte Baker, a Georgia farmer whose son had died at Normandy, had already offered her sponsorship. Helen hesitated. "My daughters need me, but do they need me in ruins, or do they need me to build something new?" She decided to return first, assess the situation, then bring her daughters to America under Kate Harrison's sponsorship. Kate had offered to sponsor multiple women, to help them build new lives. Anna was torn. "If I stay, I can see David, but I will never see my mother again. She will die alone calling for me." But the meeting with Kate had already been arranged. In 1 week, Anna would sit across from the woman who had saved her son, the woman who had lost her own son and filled that emptiness with a German boy who needed love. 2 mothers, 1 child, and a choice that would require both of them to redefine everything they thought they knew about family and sacrifice and the impossible compromises that war demands. We're about halfway through this remarkable story, and I want to pause here to ask you something important. If you're watching this and you remember the 1940s, if you remember when German prisoners of war were held in camps across America, I want to hear from you. Did your father or grandfather work at one of these camps? Did your family encounter German prisoners? What did they tell you about how those men and women were treated? Leave your memories in the comments. These stories matter. This generation's experiences need to be preserved. And if you're finding value in this story, please consider sharing it with someone who would appreciate it. Click that share button. Help us keep these histories alive. Because what happens next in our story would test everything these women thought they knew about mercy, about mothers, and about the impossible choices that love sometimes forces upon us. Anna Schmidt and Kate Harrison were about to meet face to face, and what they would decide together would prove that sometimes the strongest families are built not from blood, but from the courage to put a child's needs above your own pain. 1 week after Germany's surrender, Anna Schmidt sat in Captain Reynolds' office waiting. The morning light filtered through the windows, painting stripes across the wooden floor. 2 chairs had been arranged facing each other. The atmosphere was tense but respectful, careful, as if everyone understood that what was about to happen would change lives in ways that could not be undone. Anna had dressed carefully that morning, a clean blouse donated by the volunteers, her hair braided and pinned. She wanted to look like a worthy mother, like someone who deserved to be part of her son's life. Her hands would not stop shaking. David's photograph was in her pocket, a talisman against the impossibility of this moment. The door opened. Kate Harrison entered. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. Her face showed the strain of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. But she stood straight, shoulders back, carrying her own burden with the same dignity she had shown in the sewing circle. Captain Reynolds made the introductions, his voice quiet and formal. Mrs. Schmidt, this is Mrs. Catherine Harrison. Mrs. Harrison, Anna Schmidt. I'll leave you two to talk. Take all the time you need. He left the room, closed the door softly behind him, and then it was just two mothers facing each other across a space that felt wider than oceans. Both victims of the same war, both loving the same child, one who had given birth, one who had given a home. Kate spoke first. Her voice broke on the first words, but she pushed through. Mrs. Schmidt, Anna, Lieutenant Reynolds explained everything. I had no idea David was your son. The orphanage told us his mother was dead. They said he had no family. We would never have, we did not know. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. Recent, David almost 4 years old now, smiling, healthy, holding a toy horse in his small hands. He wore American clothes, denim overalls, a striped shirt. His hair was neatly combed. His cheeks were full. He looked happy. Anna's hands shook as she took the photograph. She traced his face with one finger, learning the changes that 7 months had written on him. He had grown. His face had lost some of its baby roundness. He looked older. He looked American. Kate continued, words spilling out now, like she had been holding them back for too long. He talks about you. He calls you his first mama. He has dreams about you. We have been trying to help him remember you while also helping him feel safe with us. We tell him stories about Germany, about his mama who loved him. We did not want him to forget. She handed Anna the photograph. Keep it. I have others. There are many others. Anna could not speak, could not process the kindness in this gesture. This woman who had every legal right to David, who could have erased Anna from his memory, had instead kept her alive in his heart. Kate pulled out papers then. Work visa sponsorship application, already filled out, already signed, her handwriting clear and precise on every line. I cannot give him back, Kate said, and now tears were running down her face. The adoption is legal and he is thriving with us. My husband and I, we love him. He has become part of our family, part of our hearts. But I can give you something else. She pushed the papers across the small table between them. Come to Texas, work on our ranch, live near David, be part of his life. You will not be his legal mother. The law says he is ours now, but you can be present. You can watch him grow. You can know that he is safe and loved. You can be, Kate's voice broke completely. You can be his other mama. Anna looked at the papers. Harrison Ranch, Fort Worth, Texas. Kate's signature. Just a blank line waiting for Anna's name. A choice written in ink and official stamps. A future that required her to accept an impossible compromise. My mother is dying in Berlin, Anna whispered. Kate's face crumpled. I know. I am so sorry. I cannot make this choice for you. No one can. But whatever you decide, David will know who you are. I promise you that. I swear on my son's memory, David will know his first mama loves him. Anna sat in silence. Two paths stretched before her, both leading through pain. She could return to Germany, see her mother one last time, hold her hand as she died, bury her with the proper prayers and tears. Then what? Return to ruins, to starvation, to a country that no longer existed, and David would be lost to her forever. An ocean and an adoption certificate away. A fading memory of a mama he used to have, or she could go to Texas, never see her mother alive again, never hear her voice or feel her embrace, or ask forgiveness for leaving her alone at the end. Her mother would die calling Anna's name and hearing only silence. But Anna would be near David. She could watch him grow. She could be part of his life. She could be loved by him, even if she could never truly have him. I will come to Texas, Anna said finally. The words felt like stones in her mouth. But first I must go to Berlin. I must see my mother one last time. I must say goodbye to her properly. And I must see David in person. To explain. To tell him I am coming back. Kate nodded understanding in every line of her face. We will wait for you as long as it takes. Take care of your mother. We will bring David to see you before you leave for Germany. You will have time with him. Anna picked up the pen with trembling hands. She signed her name on the line, Anna Schmidt. The signature looked small and lost on the official paper. But it was done. She had chosen. She had signed away her rights as David's only mother. She had agreed to share him with a woman who had been a stranger 3 weeks ago. 2 mothers, 1 child. An impossible compromise built on love and loss and the understanding that sometimes keeping a child safe meant breaking your own heart. Kate reached across the table and took Anna's hand. "We will do this together. We will both love him. We will both be his mothers. And he will be better for having both of us." Anna could not speak. She just held Kate's hand and cried. And Kate cried with her. Two women bound together by a 3-year-old boy who would grow up speaking 2 languages and calling 2 women mama and never quite understanding why his family was different until he was old enough to know that different did not mean broken. 2 weeks later, Kate and her husband, William Harrison, brought David to Camp Pine Valley. Special permission had been granted by Reynolds. A supervised visit in the administration building. 1 hour. Carefully monitored, but 1 hour with her son. Anna waited in a small room. Her heart beat so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Then the door opened and Kate entered, holding David's hand. He was bigger than in the photographs. More real, more solid, more alive. He saw Anna and stopped. His eyes went wide. Recognition flickered across his face like sunlight on water. "Miss Anna," he said in English, his accent already touched by Texas. "You're the lady from my dreams." Anna dropped to her knees, opened her arms, and David, after a moment's hesitation, ran into them. She held him, breathed in the smell of him, soap and sunshine and little boy. His heart beat against her chest. His arms went around her neck. And for one perfect moment, nothing else existed. Not the war, not the ocean, not the adoption papers. Just a mother and her son. "Mama," he whispered, and the word was in German, the old word, the first word, the word he had said before he learned English. "Yes, baby. Yes, Mama is here." Kate stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. This was right. This was hard and painful and would require sacrifice from everyone. But this was right. David needed both of them, and they both needed him. Anna told David what she could, in simple words mixed between German and English. "Mama has to go away for a little while, to see grandmother who is sick. But I will come back. I will live near you in Texas. You will have 2 mamas who love you very much." David did not fully understand. He was too young. But he felt the love. He felt the safety of being held by 2 women who would move heaven and earth to protect him. "You promise you come back?" he asked. "I promise, my darling." The hour passed too quickly. When it was time to leave, David went to Kate without fuss. He had learned that Kate was safe, that Kate was home. He took her hand and looked back at Anna. "Bye, Miss Anna. Goodbye, my David." And then they were gone. Anna sat in the empty room and felt the weight of her choice settle onto her shoulders. She would go to Berlin. She would watch her mother die. She would say goodbye to the woman who had given her life. And then she would cross an ocean again to live in a country that had been her enemy, working for a woman who had her son, sharing a child who should have been only hers. It was impossible. It was unfair. It was the best option in a world where there were no good options. 3 months later, Anna stood on a dusty road outside Fort Worth, Texas. The bus that had brought her from the port had pulled away, leaving her alone in a landscape so different from anything she had known that it felt like stepping onto another planet. The sky was bigger here, wider, endless in a way that made her feel small and exposed. Berlin had been exactly as terrible as she had feared. Her mother had died in Anna's arms, whispering prayers in David's name. The city was rubble and despair. Anna had buried her mother in a cemetery cratered by bombs, standing alone at the grave because everyone else was dead or gone or too broken to attend one more funeral. She had seen David in Berlin too. Kate and William had brought him 1 week before Anna's ship departed, a gift of mercy that Anna would never forget. David had cried when she explained she was leaving, had clung to her and begged her not to go, too young to understand that leaving meant coming back. That goodbye in Berlin meant hello in Texas. Now she stood in Texas, waiting, her single suitcase at her feet. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag. Everything except her son, who lived on a ranch she could not yet see, with people who were strangers and family all at once. A truck appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind it like a cape. It grew closer and Anna could see Kate driving. And beside her, bouncing in his seat with excitement, was David. The truck stopped. David did not wait for Kate to open the door. He scrambled out, nearly falling in his haste, and ran toward Anna, shouting her name. "Miss Anna, Miss Anna!" You came back. He crashed into her with the full force of a nearly 4-year-old body. Anna caught him and lifted him and held him close. He was heavier than she remembered. Stronger. More American. But he was hers. In whatever limited way the world would allow, he was hers. "Welcome to Texas," Kate said, stepping out of the truck. Her smile was warm but careful. This was new territory for all of them. Welcome home. The Hershey's ranch was larger than Anna had imagined. 300 acres of grassland rolling toward a horizon that never seemed to arrive. Cattle dotted the landscape like moving boulders. Horses grazed in corrals near the outbuildings. The main house was white with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun. It looked like the America from movies. The America that German propaganda had said did not exist. Prosperous and clean and impossibly spacious. Standing on that porch was a man Anna had not met yet. William Harrison. 58 years old, weathered by sun and work and grief. He wore a cowboy hat and boots and an expression that gave nothing away. This was Kate's husband, David's adoptive father, the man whose son had died at Saipan, while Anna's husband died in Russia and Margaret's husband died at Normandy. All of them casualties of the same war, connected now by a boy who climbed out of the truck, chattering about horses. William did not smile, did not offer a warm welcome. He just looked at Anna with eyes that had seen too much loss and nodded once. "You'll sleep in the guest house," he said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Work starts at 5 in the morning." Anna understood. She was here on terms. She had to prove herself. She had to earn her place in David's life through work and end time and the slow building of trust. "Yes, sir," she said in careful English. William's eyebrow rose slightly, maybe surprise at the respect, maybe approval of her willingness to accept the arrangement. "Can you cook, yes, sir?" "Good. Kate needs help in the house and with the boy. You'll work with her." It was not kindness. It was not cruelty. It was just the arrangement, the terms of the compromise. Anna would work for her right to be near her son, and she accepted it because the alternative was being an ocean away, wondering if he remembered her. The first weeks were hard. William barely spoke to her except to give instructions. The ranch work was demanding in ways she had never experienced. The Texas heat was brutal, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. David was confused about who Anna was and what role she played in his life. "Are you my mama or Miss Anna?" he asked one morning, his face scrunched in concentration. "Both, darling. I am both. But Kate is mama too. Yes, you have two mamas who love you." David considered this, his 3-year-old mind, working through the complexity. "That's a lot of love," he decided finally. "Yes, baby, that's a lot of love." William watched, evaluated, tested Anna's commitment, waited to see if she would break under the weight of this impossible situation. But Anna had survived 6 months in transport. She had watched her mother die. She had buried her homeland. She did not break easily. 2 weeks after Anna arrived, Margaret showed up at the ranch in Mrs. Baker's truck. The two women embraced like sisters, holding each other with the fierce grip of people who had survived the same storm. "You made it," Anna said in German. "We both did," Margaret replied. That evening, Kate invited both women to dinner at the main house. It was the first time William would sit at a table with two German women, former enemies, people whose countries had killed people he loved. He hesitated in the doorway, his jaw tight with the effort of this choice. Kate saw it, touched his arm gently. "Well," she said softly, "our son believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. This is hard, but it is right." William nodded slowly, came inside, sat down at the table. His hands gripped his fork like he was preparing for battle. But he sat. The meal was awkward at first. Stilted conversation translated between English and German. Careful politeness. Everyone aware they were walking on ground that could collapse at any moment. But then David started talking about his day, mixing English and German in the way children do, and the adults found themselves smiling despite the weight of history sitting at the table with them. After dinner, William surprised everyone. Saturday, he announced, "We're having a barbecue, ranch tradition, feeding the hands and neighbors. You'll both help." It was not a request. It was an order, but it was also an inclusion. An acceptance, the first crack in his careful distance. Saturday arrived with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. The barbecue pit had been dug 3 feet deep in the ground behind the house. Mesquite wood had been burning since 4 in the morning, creating a bed of coals that glowed like molten metal. The smell of smoke drifted across the ranch, announcing to everyone within miles that William Harrison was cooking. And when William Harrison cooked, people came. The meat had been prepared with the kind of attention that bordered on reverence. 30 pounds of beef brisket rubbed with nothing but salt and black pepper and garlic. The simplicity was the point. Good meat needed nothing else. It had been on the smoker since midnight. Low and slow, the smoke seeping into every fiber, creating the crimson ring that marked properly smoked Texas barbecue. By 10 in the morning, people started arriving. Ranch hands who worked the surrounding properties, neighboring ranchers and their families, people from Fort Worth who had known the Harrisons for decades, and veterans, men who had fought in the war, men who had seen combat in Europe and the Pacific, men who had lost friends and brothers to German and Japanese guns. Margaret felt their eyes on her, suspicious stares, hostility barely concealed beneath Texas politeness, whispers that carried across the yard like smoke. That's one of them, Germans. Here, at William Harrison's ranch. After everything, she wanted to disappear, wanted to sink into the earth and never be seen. But William had given an order. Help serve. So she stood at the serving line, hands shaking, waiting for the condemnation she knew was coming. William stood by the barbecue pit carving brisket with practiced precision. Each slice revealed the smoke ring, the tender meat, the fat that had rendered down into pure flavor. And as each person approached with their plate, William said the same thing. This here's Margaret, works for the Baker farm, here visiting today. This here's Anna, works on our ranch. They work hard, kept their word. That's enough for me. His endorsement carried weight in this community. If William Harrison said someone was all right, that meant something. The responses were mixed. Some nodded stiffly, some looked uncomfortable. But no one objected. No one refused food from Margaret's hands or Anna's. The power of William Harrison's word held them in check. After everyone had been served, William put down his carving knife. He stood by the smoking pit, the heat rising around him, and called for quiet. The crowd settled. Conversations died. All eyes turned to the man who rarely spoke, but whose words always mattered. Got something to say, William began. His voice was rough from smoke and emotion. My son Michael died at Saipan. Some of you knew him. Good boy. Believed in doing right. Believed in America, in what we stand for. He paused, looked at Margaret, at Anna. His face was hard, but his eyes held something softer. These women lost people too. Husbands, sons, family, different sides of the same war. But the war is over now. Another pause. Longer this time. The smoke from the pit drifted across the yard, carrying the smell of mesquite and beef and tradition. And I've been thinking about what Michael would want, what he would say about how we treat former enemies. He'd say follow the rules. He'd say be fair. He'd say that's what makes us American. Not revenge, not holding grudges, following the code even when it hurts. William's voice grew stronger. Out here, we got the cowboy code. Treat people fair, keep your word, respect everyone, even people you don't like. Same principle as that Geneva Convention the Army used. Protocol over feelings, that's how civilization works. He looked around at the assembled crowd, meeting eyes daring anyone to disagree. So if anyone's got a problem with these women being here, you can take it up with me. But while you're on my land, you'll treat them with respect. That clear, the crowd murmured agreement. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked thoughtful, but no one objected. William Harrison had spoken. That was the end of it. After the speech, William did something that shocked everyone. He served Margaret a plate of brisket himself, cut the slices with his own hands, placed them on her plate with the same care he would show to any honored guest. Mesquite smoked, he said. 14 hours. Texas tradition. Margaret took a bite. The flavor was incredible, smoky and tender and perfectly seasoned. The fat melted on her tongue. The bark, the dark crust formed by smoke and time, was crunchy and rich. Inside, the meat was pink and juicy and pulled apart at the touch of a fork. It tasted like the bacon from that first breakfast at Camp Pine Valley, like Friedrich's favorite Sunday meal, like home and foreign and hope all mixed together. Tears ran down her face. She could not stop them. Did not try. It's perfect, she managed. William nodded. Germans know good meat when they taste it, I guess. It was the first time he had acknowledged her as anything other than a worker, The first time he had treated her like a person with a culture and a past worth respecting. The first crack in the wall he had built around his grief. That night, after everyone had left, Margaret sat on the porch steps of the guest house. She could not sleep. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. The stars above Texas looked different from the stars above Germany, but she knew they were the same stars. The same light traveling the same distance to shine on a world that felt completely new. William appeared from the darkness, sat down beside her without asking permission, lit his pipe, smoked in silence for several minutes. Two people who had lost everything finding a strange kind of peace in shared quiet. "Can't sleep either?" he finally asked. Margaret shook her head. Long silence. Then William spoke again. "My son, Michael. He was 20, had a girl waiting, plans for the future. War took him, just like it took your husband." He looked at her, his face half hidden in shadow. "You lose anyone else, everyone," Margaret said quietly. "Husband, friends, country, everything I believed was true." William nodded. "Out here we got a code, cowboy code. Been around long as there've been cowboys in Texas. Treat people fair, keep your word, respect everyone, help those who need it, stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it hurts." He turned to look at her directly. "Sound familiar, Geneva Convention," Margaret said. "Same principle, different uniform. You follow the code even when it's hard, especially when it hurts. That's what makes it mean something." He stood up, knocked the ash from his pipe. "You work hard, you keep your word. That's enough for me." He walked away, and Margaret sat on the porch and understood finally what America really meant. Not propaganda, not slogans, just people choosing to follow principles even when emotions screamed for revenge. Following the code, because that's what separated civilization from chaos. And then 40 years passed. June 1985. Camp Pine Valley, Georgia, now a museum. An elderly woman stood in front of the preserved bathhouse building, reading the plaque that had been mounted beside the door. Camp Pine Valley, 1945 to 1946, where 847 German prisoners of war discovered America's greatest strength, the courage to follow its own rules even when revenge would have been easier. Anna Schmidt Harrison was 64 years old now, gray hair, lined face, eyes that still carried sadness, but also peace. She had come back for the museum dedication, to remember, to honor, to testify to what had happened here 40 years before. Beside her stood a man in his early 40s, David Harrison Schmidt. He had insisted on hyphenating his name when he turned 18, acknowledging both his mother's, both his heritages, both his identities. "You slept here," David said, touching the barracks wall. "I wrote you letters here," Anna replied, "every night, hoping you would remember me." David squeezed her hand. "I remember. Both my mothers made sure I remembered." More people arrived. Margaret Weber Baker, 68 years old, still sharp and strong. Helen Fisher, 74, retired teacher. Her daughters, both university professors now. Her granddaughters studying German history. And then a surprise. Colonel James Reynolds, retired, 78 years old. He had driven from Florida to be here. Had to be here. Carried his old clipboard preserved for 40 years. The women saw him and stopped. 40 years dissolved. They were back in that mess hall, back in that moment when he had explained what protocol meant. Reynolds approached Anna first. "Mrs. Schmidt," he said. "Mrs. Harrison," she corrected gently. "But also Schmidt. Both names, both lives." Reynolds smiled. "I kept records. All 847 women. I never forgot any of you." He showed her the clipboard. Her entry, Schmidt Anna, son David, age 3, location unknown. Then a note added later, reunited, Texas, Harrison Ranch. Margaret stepped forward. "You kept your protocol, Colonel." "Every day," Reynolds replied. "For all of you." The ceremony began. Crowds gathered, veterans, historians, families, young people who had never known war. The plaque was unveiled. Words carved in bronze. Permanent. Unchanging. True. David Harrison Schmidt had been asked to speak. He stood at the podium looking out at the assembled crowd and spoke words that had been 40 years in the making. "My name is David Harrison Schmidt. I am the son of two mothers, two countries, two identities. The war tried to make me choose. But America taught me I don't have to choose. I can be both. His voice was steady, strong, carrying across the crowd like a promise. My biological mother lost everything in the war, her husband, her country, her son. But Camp Pine Valley gave her something back. Not through force, through protocol, through following rules. Even when emotions scream for revenge. That is American exceptionalism. Not military might, not economic power, but the strength to see enemies as human beings. The courage to follow our own values even when it's hard. He gestured to the flags behind him. American and German flying side by side. My father, William Harrison, before he died, he told me, the code matters more than your feelings, son. You follow it even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That's what made your mothers into a family. That's what made enemies into Americans. The applause was thunderous. Veterans were crying. Young people were understanding. History was being honored and preserved and passed forward. As the sun set over Camp Pine Valley, 4 generations stood together. Anna and David's children, and a young museum intern inspired by their story. They stood where the messel had been, where Margaret had confronted Reynolds, where everything had changed. March 12, 1945. Anna said softly, I stood in a bathhouse and felt hot water for the first time in 6 months. I expected cruelty. I got protocol. I expected revenge. I got rules. I expected monsters. I got human beings doing their jobs with dignity. That protocol gave you life, David, gave me a future, gave all of us a chance to become something other than what the war made us. David put his arm around his mother. The bathhouse protocol, America's greatest weapon, not force, but strength to follow its own rules, especially when it's hard. Of the 847 women who arrived in March 1945, 412 returned to Germany and rebuilt lives in ruins. 435 remained in America, became citizens, contributed to the country that had been their enemy. 0 reported abuse or violations of the Geneva Convention. Not because Americans were perfect, but because they chose to follow their own rules, chose protocol over revenge, chose civilization over chaos, chose to be the country they claimed to be, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That choice, made in countless small moments by ordinary people doing jobs with dignity, became America's most powerful weapon. More powerful than any bomb, more lasting than any military victory, more transformative than any peace treaty. It was the bathhouse protocol, and it changed the world. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. These histories matter. These lessons remain vital. And if you have stories from your family about how America treated its enemies during World War II, whether in prison camps or on battlefields or in the years after, please leave them in the comments. We want to preserve these memories. We want to honor the greatest generation's choice to follow the code, even when it was hard, because that choice defined what America really means. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for understanding why the protocol always mattered more than the pain.